Welcome to SEN2A Insights, which is our podcast series. I'm Kris Pierce, and this week we're celebrating Speech Pathology Week. And the theme of this Speech Pathology Week is impact through communication. And so we've invited Professor Angela Morgan, speech pathologist and research lead at University of Melbourne, to talk to us about her work. Angela is an internationally recognised speech pathologist for her work in childhood speech disorders, including those linked to genetic conditions such as SEN2A. So thanks for being with us, Angela.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Kris.
Could you start by introducing yourself, because I know there's a lot more to who you are and all the work that you're doing, and just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing.
That's really kind. Yeah, a lot of families say, how did you get into this area? So perhaps that's one nice start. And it goes right back, of course, but I won't go right back that far. There is a bit of a family history of speech disorder in my family, so I always was interested in the genetic component there. But then fast forward a little bit through my studies as a speech pathologist, and yeah, I was fortunate to go to London after my PhD and work with a family where they had identified that there was a gene called FOXP2, and changes, spelling errors in FOXP2 led to this quite striking speech apraxia. And there were 3 generations of that family at the time who were experiencing speech apraxia. So that was a really exciting time because we'd never really understood the cause for speech disorder. We thought it was something a bit neurological, lots of thoughts about what might be happening, but no concrete evidence. So that first gene was super exciting. And then I suppose after a few years, I thought, not everybody I see has this gene change. There must be so many other gene changes that are also linked to this condition. We've got 20-something thousand genes in the body. Now we know it's 23,000 or so. And so there must be other causes. So that sort of really got me so interested in thinking about the links between genes and speech and language, really. And then moved back to Australia, and that's what I decided I'd love to do. And then the other side was also working in special education. So that's, as the term was then, 20 years ago in Tasmania. And the children who I was always really drawn to were children who had different conditions, and then called syndromes, of course, and really trying to understand about those conditions, because I felt like surely if I can learn more about what that child and family are experiencing in a broader sense, maybe that will give me clues for how to help them, but support them better. So as I say, there's lots of reasons that I'm here, but they're the main ones. Yeah.
I know that you lead quite a large team at the University of Melbourne across MCRI. What are the main areas of that research at the moment?
Yeah, lovely. So there are 2 main areas. So the first picks up on what I was just talking about then, where we have families come to us and they say, why is my child 9 and they're still really having difficulty speaking or having trouble getting going with the verbal speech? And so we're looking for genetic causes, and we've been fortunate to identify, I think there are over 50 genes now that have been linked, so a long way on from the FOXP2 gene discovery. They're linked to apraxia, so there's that gene discovery angle. But then also wanting to say, okay, if that gene is affected, so say SEN2A, then let's look back to other children who also have that same genetic diagnosis, and let's look at many children with that one gene and one condition and try and understand the speech features. So there's the 2 angles. They're finding the new genes, and then once you've found those genes or they're linked, going back and really trying to look in a population of children who all experience the same biology and look at how their speech and language may be the same or different across that condition.
Yeah, I think if I look back at my son's journey, I remember really early on, and I don't remember clearly deciding or committing to finding communication style for him, but I remember going to a signing training session, like a whole day.
Wow. Yeah.
So I signed up, and I'm going to find him something. It was really important to my husband and I. And within the first 5 minutes, they said, if the criteria to being successful at signing was having a certain level of dexterity, and I was like, straight away, I was like, okay, this is not for me. Stay a little bit longer in that session, but I was like, okay, that's not option. So I think really being able to help families maybe navigate to that might be helpful earlier. That's priceless, I think. So you talked about that work where you're finding out causes and then trying to work with those genes and see what the patterns are and potentially what can be used to help. What's a good example of the outputs that you're seeing from your work directly or from some of the team's work?
Yeah, no, that's a lovely question. And I think I'll pick up on what you were just speaking about with Will there, your son, and who is really a star in terms of now augmentative and alternative communication. So that's one of the things, Kris, that we even found when we started doing this work, we'd say, oh, we're looking at speech and language abilities. And to us, that encompasses all forms of communication. But then we'd realised that some families weren't taking part because their children were non-speaking or minimally verbal, or these different terms are used. I think non-speaking is a preferred term at the moment. And we were just absolutely mortified that here we are, communication experts, and we had already had a failure in terminology breakdown in saying to families, we welcome all forms of communication and we want to understand what your child is using at this time, and then we want to see how can we support that. So that was an early learning of how naive we are, but how we have breakdown all the time about the terms we use and how we're going to navigate. So one thing we do now is we really make sure we make it plain to everybody. We want to understand all forms of communication. And then one of the things we've really learned, one of the take-home messages has been exactly what you're talking about, Kris, and your journey on Will, how little support there has been for families in understanding that there are alternative means. Some children might become verbal. Look, our society completely overemphasizes verbal communication, as we know, but that actually there are all of these different forms. But how do you navigate that? No, somebody could have been there saying to you, okay, Kris, we know that Will might have difficulty with sign, so how about we try these other 5, 6 options? We've got aided communication, we've got non-aided, and let us expose Will to these different forms and let us see what he naturally looks like he would love to use, what's going to work for his world, and then let's support that, which is what you've done as a mum. You've advocated, you've fought hard, but really we as a speech pathology profession, we should be the ones helping you do that, and other professionals too, because already we have a lack of expertise in speech for this specialised area, but we need to train others. And we've even had medical colleagues, very close colleagues of mine even, who've said things like, oh, does AC even work? So there's this myth busting and, oh, won't it stop them talking verbally, when we know actually it just opens up opportunities to use more grammar and words and learn your sentence structure and get narratives going, things that children who can't produce the sounds motorically or for whatever reason themselves don't get opportunities to do. Anyway, that is for me one of the greatest learnings we've had, and one of the greatest sort of things that keeps us awake at night is, how do we address this? How do we train the profession better? What can we be doing? So we've got a workshop coming up in October for speech pathologists on C. Parents are actually really welcome to that. I think we're just about to open it up to parents to come for free as well. It will be more tailored to speech pathologists, but I think, yeah, we have to start making a bit of difference in that way. Sorry, I get very chatty as Kris. I'll stop for a minute.
You really answered the question I was going to go into, like how do we broaden knowledge around these topics, because these genetic conditions or neurodevelopment conditions are so complex and rare in their own that it is very challenging for families to find people and allied health professionals and also medical support teams who understand enough to support them and guide them. So let's pull that out a little bit. You're going to have an education session coming up. What other ways can perhaps patient organisations and families, are there resources that they can lean into that perhaps that you have, or maybe that's a future job for us?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mix. There are amazing organisations like Agoski as well. So there are some organisations where they are experts and specialists and doing some of this lovely work. But sometimes, yeah, even knowing how to get to these organisations is a challenge. So I really think it's the pathways and the patient journeys. I actually have someone working with me, Nicole McGill at University of Melbourne, who is a speech pathologist but did a lot of work in her PhD looking at waiting lists and referral pathways, but we're broadening out to try and understand how we get better integrated models of care. And that's something that was recognised in the NDIS report as well, that actually we're really failing on that navigational part and then getting that
Yep.
good integrated care. And we all know it's up to families. I've got to find the speech, I've got to find the physio. Sometimes you find a coordinated practice, that's great. But do they have the specialist skills I need in AAC? We've all still got to work together because we're all a bit fractured perhaps in the skill sets that we have. And that
Yep.
has become worse. And we all knew that would potentially become more fraught under this system, as many positives as there are. Exactly. It's a bit of a work in progress, Kris, and we're trying to identify and map many of the specialist groups and centres who are doing that
Yep.
work. Then we're trying to upskill, I think, the universities. I think we have pulled in over the years, and I've worked at a few universities and also in the UK, we'll pull in the experts. They give a couple of hours of a lecture and then that's it. And
Yep.
perhaps when we had organisations like Scope, etc., you'd have the specialists go and then they learn on the job. Now it's not such a model. We are seeing
Yeah.
children with the complex needs across every sector and very much in the private sector where it's harder to gain that expertise. I think we're very behind and failing a little bit and need to scramble really quickly to be meeting those educational needs better for our students, training the next generation, and then utilising that expertise in professional development, etc. But then also helping parents. I think the term augmentative and alternative communication, I've struggled with that as I was a student 20 years ago. I think we have terminology issues as well.
Yep.
Because I often say to other physicians as well, oh, AAC, oh, what is that? If our own physicians and medical professionals don't even know what the term is, what hope
Yep.
do we have for educating them further about aided and unaided communication? And there are so many levels at which I think we've got communication breakdown
Yep.
in helping navigate the services. So I rambled on then, Kris, but you can see it's a big complex issue, which we know, and we're trying. And I think one great thing is it's just been acknowledged internationally now that this is an area of desperate need and we all need to be working towards it. So I think that has been positive. To help advocate a little bit more with the World Health Organization reports and other reports saying that this is a critical area of need.
Yeah. With the genetic conditions,
Mm.
I guess in Q2A and Fox P2, G2.
P2, there's also Fox P1, which is more common
I was going to say,
and well understood now. Yeah.
Heather Renton will kill me for not.
Yep, Heather. A shout out to Heather. Absolutely. And really one of the conditions, we do see many children with that condition. Actually,
Yeah,
it's more common, yeah, than Fox P2 for sure.
I was going to say, so the evolution of understanding these conditions, so like when we get natural history study, we start understanding some trajectory around these children, it's great to have that information, but it can also be quite challenging for parents because they might read information in scientific journals that say a child with this particular variant, the probability of them having functional speech is not may not happen.
Mm.
So what in that situation,
Mm.
like how do we support parents and bring in hope around how these children can communicate and really have, like you say, that supportive environment and team? Because I can see now, as we understand SEN2A better, that some of that trajectory is being understood better. And
Yeah.
I guess as a parent, I want to make sure, and someone that runs an organisation, we have those supportive resources, but also
Yeah.
ways of linking them in and helping them navigate what that might look like.
Yeah, look, spot on. And we think a lot about that. What we're fortunate to have, you mentioned my lovely team, and it is a really broad team with psychologists and speech pathologists, nurses, people with expertise in genomics and health. But the person I sort of want to highlight now, and where I think we've got an opportunity too, is a person called Mariana Loretta. And Mariana trained as a speech pathologist, but then she also had a real passion and love for genetics, and she went back and trained as a genetic counsellor. And I'm so
Fantastic.
fortunate that even though she needs to get the rest of her sort of registration, I think they call it, for her her Masters of Genetic Counselling professional registration, she is now going to work for us 2 days. I always kept her on a day. I was able to keep her a day. And now we've got her for 2 whole days. And because she came to me the other day and she said, I'd like to do a bit more. And she wants to do more exactly in this sort of education space. So as a genetic counsellor, the families I know that she sees who do receive diagnoses like SCN2A and other
Yeah,
diagnoses where we know verbal speech and communication is going to be challenging, gee whiz, no one gets a better first appointment counselling session around that diagnosis and communication than those lovely families who are seeing Mariana at the moment, because she
yeah,
intimately understands both sides. And so we've actually got great engagement from the Uni Melbourne Masters of Genetic Counselling course. And we've had a stream of wonderful students who are also really interested in this area. So I think that's one fantastic opportunity, is growing the Master of Genetic Counselling profession as well, to really understand from that first point about
yeah,
communication, the impacts of communication. So not just saying, here's a paper, 50% of children may not develop verbal speech, you better find a speechy and good luck. But they'll understand that there are options available. And from
yeah,
that first moment saying, okay, verbal speech isn't everything. You will get to understand your child's personality. You will get to hear that your child loves you from them by them using alternate forms of communication, and that these are what we could start to offer you, so that there is a hopeful conversation from day one, rather than just this prognostic 50% will get this 60% sort of approach, which I think is really what we're at now. And we're not even at that as for many conditions, which is why we do study so many, because for many families, they're just told speech delay, which is a ridiculous term. No one knows what that means. They don't
yeah,
know, does that mean you'll catch up? Does that mean that's it forever? I think, yeah, there's a lot to be done, but I'm really hopeful, and I am proud of the work that the group is doing via Mariana and via that nice engagement with the genetic counsellors. We also have to tackle that with our clinical genetics colleagues, but they're pretty fantastic, and they've got a broad lot of work they're already doing and millions of
yeah,
things they've got to do. I know you want to hook us in more with resources and things. We're trying to scrub all those together, even just nationally,
yeah,
and working with other organisations. So Apraxia Kids, there are some speech and language organisations that also really try and share resources. But again, that's the navigation. It's still, every week I have families write to me, my child is still minimally verbal, they're using this device, or we've tried this device, it's not working, where do I go next? And I still feel at a bit of a loss. I'll use all my usual suspects and all the contacts I know. I'm a bit rusty in the Northern Territory or ACT, or we need a community of practice. We always use that term, but I guess we're trying to really start to establish better that community of practice. Yeah.
yeah. That sounds, it's a project in motion, but I just didn't want to touch on something that you mentioned when you were talking about children that potentially may not be verbal, and that they will, you said along the lines of, these children will be able to communicate with you. You'll get to know them, and that you'll know that they love you. And I got a little bit emotional because that's what we hear from parents. I just, knowing that I'll never hear them say mum, or I'll never hear them say I love you, or to know that there's people working and to better understand and maybe provide ways in which that language can be shared between a mother and father and their child, I think is really important. Having that connection with your child and finding it, I think, is extremely important, as well as the functional aspects.
I completely agree. And I think always I can hear my physician colleagues in my head already saying it depends on your cognitive function. It depends on, but I think often there can be a mismatch too, where people may assume they do. People assume less of many children who have less verbal communication. It's just how it goes. And then we hear these comments, oh, they understand more than they can say. Yes, I'm sure they absolutely do. So then let's give them an opportunity to be able to produce more And don't just rely on verbal speech. There is a terrible bias out there on this. It's a huge issue
Yeah.
that needs to be busted down. Kris, I'd love you to tell us a bit about Will. And I think the other challenge is often people say, we showed these devices to the child, but they didn't seem that interested. Man, no, because they haven't yet learned the power of that and the whole dynamic and how many times it might take, like many new skills, to approach a child and try working. It is hard work. It is really
It,
hard work. Tell me a bit about Will. I always want to know a bit more about your journey. We see each other quickly in coffee breaks and say we want to talk more, and then you're popular and get dragged away. But I'd love to, and I think it's great for families to hear. We've got a few superstar kids and families, but I know they're very modest about how hard it was probably to get that communication going and how long that took. I think that's another big part of the conversation is it's not easy either. Verbal speech is really hard. Those motor speech drills and those terrible sessions can be not always terrible, but they're hard sessions for
yeah,
many
yeah.
kids. I shouldn't say terrible. All my colleagues, we try really hard to make them engaging. I'll get in trouble now. But tell me a bit about being a mum and really being the person to push communication with Will.
Yeah. I have a colleague or a peer in the US, Jason, who always he used to always say to me, you didn't need to use Will as an example because it gives families hope, and you need to tell his story. But I am a little
You're modest and
shy. Yeah,
it's your personal life as well. So please
yeah.
don't feel you have to
Oh
share.
no,
But
no. But,
yeah.
we shared some stuff about him using AI, and
Yes.
it has got a good response. But
Oh,
essentially, as I said, I just had this drive to teach, for him to be able to communicate. He needed to be able, probably started with just yes or no, or I want, I like this versus I don't. And it just came into play more and more as he got older, for example, because he had the autism as well as part of SEN2A.
mm,
He had very restrictive eating pattern.
mm,
And so very early on we started picture communication. And yeah, we went in the summer, we went to Adelaide every summer and did a week of this training with PECs. I don't know how
mm,
much but that's what we used.
mm, mm,
I became a trained person so I could do it in a way that seemed to make sense for Will.
mm,
And we just slowly progressed what we introduced and how we introduced it. So at first it was symbols, right? Or a
mm,
picture,
mm.
and then we put the word on it. And then when he could recognize the word, we took the picture off.
Fantastic.
So that was over years and years and years. And now he can type like a monster and send texts at the rate of knots.
And you've
But
got a real sense of personality too, don't you? Tell me, he loves music, doesn't he?
he loves Queen.
Queen.
Queen. He loves his Highland cattle. He's into pelicans at the minute. So he's decided that he's Storm Boy of the Sunshine Coast.
Beautiful. Oh, how
Currently get
gorgeous.
currently getting a badge made up so that he can wear it.
He's very
But
cool. He's a cool guy.
yeah,
I love
but
it.
just to focus on it, and I know
Mm,
there's boundaries around what we can use AI for. But
mm,
I'll just give you an example. So he's been
yeah.
struggling at his day program with some friendships. And so he will type into ChatGPT, my friend Joe is saying things they know upsets me. Can you help me with some strategies? And so
Oh,
it'll
amazing.
come back with some strategies and we'll talk them over, and then he'll print it out and he'll take it so that his trainer at his day program says these are the strategies I want to use to deal with this. And so
How
it's
fantastic is that? That is empowering, isn't it?
yeah, it's been a game changer for him.
Such a
Yeah.
resource, such a resource. No, I think that's spot on. And then that's the other case that you do see if children can harness written communication, and now with technology as well, even just texting, as you say. And I know another family, and when the child became more literate and had a phone, and the mum rang me up just in tears because the grandchild was writing to his grandmother, and they'd never
Oh,
really had these sort of interactions before. And it was
yeah.
just so special. And then cousins and aunties. And yeah, I think that when we can harness the written, And as you say, if you're exposing with the aided communication or unaided communication, whatever you're using, if you can have the orthography, the written word there, and just
Yeah.
keep up that visual learning as well, I think that's just a beautiful example. But also, Kris, of adapting over time. So it's not just that we have one a method at one time. But yeah, you start with something that is appropriate and then you build up, and then it's empowering also for the child when they can see that the response they've been able to generate at that time and that period of their development can get them what they need and
Yep.
prevent all that breakdown and frustration. And I'm sure you know it too. All of the behavioral, not a nice term, it's better terms for it, but people do say, oh, behavioral challenges. But often these things are just people's actual everyday feelings of frustration because you can't communicate. So
Yeah.
it's great. I do think it is more recognised now than ever before. So we're at a good point in time for future families. I feel sad for families like yourself and others. I do think you really did bear the brunt of a lack of probably support in many cases, but with greater awareness all the time, maybe we can try and make more of a difference now, despite we've opened up the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also some of the barriers I would say that exist now as this all evolves is the acceptance of what an aided communication tool can be, because there is resistance that like an iPhone can actually be a communication tool. And that's if our technology world
More
expanding.
acceptable. Yeah.
But I think we need to advocate, and when I say we, I don't mean you, as a community, for these things to be recognised.
Yes, I think you're right. Advocacy work's really core because even if we look, I just was interested the other day because in Victoria, you can sign is recognised Auslan as a language on the Victorian curriculum, and schools can advocate to select Auslan as their Australian Sign Language as their one of their languages. So like French or, but I thought, how much is this being taken up? And I couldn't find really recent evidence, but a couple of years ago, there were still only 6 schools in Victoria that had elected to
Ah,
take up sign. Okay,
right.
so with people have advocated, they've got it on the curriculum. And I've had an experience in my own child's local school, seeing families get very worked up at the thought of one of our European languages being taken away if we were going to introduce sign. And that was really soul destroying for me. I took myself off a WhatsApp group because I couldn't believe the conversations. And we also had a child at the school who did have a hearing impairment, and her family were really trying to advocate for that. I've seen that resistance, even with, I think, in sign in some ways, because for many years, the hearing we've had perhaps a greater understanding of hearing
Yeah.
challenges than we have for rare diseases, which of course with the genomics revolution, we have more and more all the time. And so different communication outcomes and understanding there that we've still been working on. But anyway, long story short, so yes, we need to do more advocacy work, but I was a bit disheartened to even see that when we have advocated, it's a language that it's not being taken up. And so how
Yeah.
do we do that in a broader sense for even less common, let's be honest, that's okay. Let's be honest. Let's talk about it. But yeah, what are the steps? What are we doing wrong? How do we improve that? And I think the other lovely part is greater voices being listened to, actually, finally, term consumer, whatever you'd like to be called, as a family living
Yeah.
through this. But I do think it's great in research all the time, finally, the consumer voice can be heard, must be heard. It's great.
Yeah.
Uni grant schemes, you won't get one unless you have actually talked to someone with lived experience. How ridiculous it's taken hundreds of years to get there. I think that's also the real positive, isn't it? That maybe we can actually, by listening to families, maybe there'll be some more change in that way too for advocacy.
Yeah, no, that's great. You've just given me a great segue into where I was going next. But lastly, I just wanted to ask you, where do you see
Mm.
your work going in the
Mm.
next, the short term, over the next 5 years? And
Mm.
then I was going to say, and where do you see that lived experience in that work? So
Mm.
thank you for
Yeah,
that.
lovely. Thanks, Kris. Lovely. Yeah. I think because I felt I think I graduated 97, so is that nearly 30 years? I've always was puzzled by what causes these conditions. Surely I need to understand what's causing the conditions if I want to really treat it better.
Yep.
which seems naive now, but I don't know. That's just how my brain worked. So I went off and did some brain imaging, and then we've done the genetics. And look, it's been amazing to understand the biology. And then if you've got a gene change, it might change how your brain develops and therefore might change how you're talking. So the two things I've learned and where we're going, one is that yes, there are precision therapies coming on board now.
Yep.
And so the work we're doing, you mentioned before too, natural history studies, we're trying to understand the communication abilities, outcomes, challenges for children with the different genetic conditions, because then as precision medicines come on board with the various pharma companies who are working on these, we've got the ASO therapies, things I'm sure you've talked about in the program before, that we advocate for speech to be an outcome measure. It's amazing how
Yep.
families, we know how important is communication. Constantly, family support groups do surveys. What is the most important thing to you? Now, if you have epilepsy or something, that's this community know that is going to be number one. We are worried
Yep.
about that, of course. But often communication for other groups who might not have epilepsy or other more medical conditions, it's communication. But the drug companies don't have communication
Yep.
as an outcome measure. So that's one thing we're fighting hard for.
Yep.
But the other thing is, of course, treatment. I always stand up, I say, oh, we want to do this and get better treatment. But I will admit it that in our group, that is a hard ask. And we haven't felt like we knew where to take that for a little while. But I'm so proud. We just got 3 years of funding for one of my postdocs, Mia St. John, to
Yep.
start doing N of one trials. So one thing we learned through our journey is, yes, the biology, sometimes shared biology. So if we take kids with SEN2A, maybe some of our features are shared. But as you guys know, as a
Yep.
community in particular, a lot of features are different. So
Yep.
actually, yes, it's nice to understand. We understand the broader features the child and family might be experiencing. But when it comes to treatment, we've got to see the individual child. What do you need? What does the family need? What does the child want? And so that's where we've come back to N of one trials. So that just means
Yep.
instead of saying, here's a big randomized control trial and you're all going to get this same ingredient of therapy, we're going to
Yep.
tailor the therapy to what you need. And I'm so
Yep.
excited about that. So Mia was going
That
to
sounds
lead
great.
that work. I'm getting
Yep.
older now, so I don't need to lead everything. It's such a
Yep.
relief. And I've felt guilty for years where we're literally taking blood and understanding genes, but what are we giving back? Yes, we're understanding
Yeah.
the prognosis. Anyway, so treatment in that regard. So that's a big part of where the program's going, of the symptoms, because that's nice gunning for precision medicine. We're all going to do it. That's still what people want. But there are the families now. And what do the
Yep.
families need now? And we need management of our symptoms or what we're living with now. So I think that's, yeah. And Kris, how are we also engaging families in that? We are asking families, what do you want to work on? So I've
Yep.
been working with the Melbourne Clinical Trial Centre at the Children's Hospital here, amazing centre, and Nick Grobler, shout out to a great statistician we've worked with who just opened our eyes. You can say to families, here, what do you want to work on? And then that's our outcome measure. And you don't have
Yeah.
to just think it's a
Yep.
standardized test all the time.
Yep.
And that then made me go, okay, it's time. If
Yep.
the science is now at this point, that's great. We can actually give families what they want. Let's go on this journey for the next few years.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And will that be, just out of interest, will that
Yeah.
be?
Who are we doing it with? Yeah, no, lovely question. So for the moment, it'll be focused a little bit on children who have apraxia, but of all different rare genetic conditions.
Yep.
Or verbal speech difficulty. They might have dysarthria or other conditions where they've really
Yep.
got verbal speech difficulty that's probably a little bit motor production based. That's Mia's one of her areas of expertise as well. She teaches at the uni too. But it's in rare disease. So we were feeling like that is a population where we're missing out.
Yeah.
And families get this diagnosis and then they say, because in a lot of the other trials for speech and language conditions, they have not been including children with genetic conditions. So we
Yes.
thought, let's come at the other end and missed out on many grants because sometimes we've put in grants of RCTs, say for a particular condition, and then we got in trouble. We got bad ratings occasionally, not for the science, but they'd say, how generalizable would that be if you're focusing on that one condition? And then we tried it the
Yep.
other way around in trials and said, okay, we'll include all the kids with rare disease. Then we'd get, oh, but you're including all the kids with different biological conditions. How will that work? How will you find any signal in your trial? It's putting too many differences together. So it was thanks to the Ainsworth family, a private philanthropic donation that we have this 3 years of funding, because to get competitive grants, we just kept getting shot down on these methodological. So we're so grateful to the Ainsworth family because they're backing Mia and they're going to support us to get this work done. And I feel like that's increasingly the way to do some of this really complex work that on paper you can't just get tick, tick, because it is a journey and we do have to understand and learn, and we're going to fail at some things, but we will also learn through that and get better. But I am really grateful to some families who see the need, because without that, I don't know what we would be doing next in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. It is one of the challenges in rare diseases, and I think that something that's being considered is like some of the clinical trials are now becoming bucket trials. So it's not one gene, it's a number of genes. But those things need to be considered, because you're not going to be able to study one gene after another, and like we've had that conversation around, there's so many genes and we'd like to do something for everyone, but it's just not possible. So I think that's challenging the system to be a little bit more broader thinking and maybe forward thinking, in that to get answers and support, we do need to be a little bit more progressive, let's
I
say.
agree. Broader, working together,
Yeah.
but broader. And of course, it's really critical. It's a family support groups. That's the most rewarding part of my job. Anytime is engaging, like the conversation with you this morning, that'll keep me on a happy mood for the rest of the day. And if you are a family and you've been identified as having this condition, of course, that's your home. These are your community. These are your people. But you're spot on. 25,000 genes. And we know then different types of variants. This could go on forever, and you can't be sequential, as you say, Kris, because we've only all got a few decades left in us, for starters. So then for those big initiatives, how do we work on communication together? How do we work on physical abilities together? How do we navigate systems, pathways together? That's, yeah, spot on. That's what another big learning I've had through this journey of working with lots of different groups is I often say, did you know that this condition also shares some of these features? And if you thought to talk together, and I know you guys do that really beautifully with Getter,
Yep.
for starters, I think you're really poster children for starters for that kind of collaborative work where you've got those synergies. But yeah, I don't see it hugely across the rest of the communities yet.
Yeah.
But I agree, that's really where we need to be going.
Yeah. All right. It's been great to chat to you. And I've learned a lot. And I'm really excited about where your work's going in the future, the impact that will have directly on families as that all evolves. I just wanted to offer you the opportunity, maybe just to share with families, clinicians, a final message around Speech Pathology Week, and just your hopes in terms of communication for children like Will and others.
Yeah, thanks, Kris. Yeah, I do. I genuinely feel very hopeful at the moment.
Yeah.
I do feel that it's really coming from the consumer voice too. I feel like I think speech pathologists have always been good at really caring about their families because we care about communication. So maybe
Yeah.
I'm not being very modest about our profession there, but I do feel like people are attracted to speech pathology do often have a phenotype themselves where they really value and they want to
Yeah.
be liked, and they want to please the families that they work with. But I think that from a research perspective and where we can really advocate and drive, it has been the forward movement in the last decade or so of the consumer voice, that in alignment together,
Yeah.
that's really where we're going to increase the advocacy. I think with the World Health Organization and other groups also saying, hey, what about augmentative alternative communication? What about children who don't have verbal speech? Really? What are people doing in that space? I think everyone is behind this initiative and wanting to see forward movement there. So I do feel like it's a great point in my career, and I feel really hopeful that in 15 years or so when I'm retiring, I think we'll be at a markedly different place than where we've been for the sort of 30 years of my life so far, where it's been pretty disparate and disappointing. So no, I feel really hopeful for the future, and particularly for the children who are non-speaking, minimally verbal, not using speech as their primary mode of communication. As you've perfectly said today, Kris, with technology, with AI, we all know the dangers of some of these things and we get concerned. But I think really for lots of our children, that it just opens up amazing opportunities.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy and we want you out there doing all your fabulous work. But yeah, we appreciate your time today.
That's only the best things I could be doing is talking with you. So never thank me for that. We're honestly so grateful to have these amazing relationships, and it's just so inspiring then for the team to go back, and we'll have lots more grant failures before we get some successes, but it makes it completely worthwhile once even just a chat like this. So thanks so much, Kris, and to everyone.